Hey friends, Sonia here with Ellie and Mac today, and today I want to show you a really fun new way to use our cut files. If you haven't taken a look, we have a huge selection of cut files available on our website, ellieandmac.com, and we just came out with 3 cute fall ones, so those are the ones I'm going to be using today to show you this new project. Now, I wanted to try punch embroidery. I've been seeing it all over Pinterest. There's so many cool projects out there. And so what I decided to try and do is use our cut files with Cricut's Infusible ink to actually iron the ink down and embellish using punch embroidery. Okay, so what do you need to get started in punch needle embroidery? You need a punch needle. This is a Clover brand one I just picked up at Joann's. You are going to potentially need a hoop. It is a lot easier if you're using a hoop, and I'll show you a couple of ways that I did and didn't use these in these various projects. And you're gonna need your embroidery thread. Now, a couple of the things that I found out that I needed over the course of this experiment are different sizes of hoops. So I have a little teeny tiny one here. And then I also discovered that I needed a different size of a needle than the one that actually came in the with the kit. That, well, and it wasn't really a kit, it was just this with the needle inside of it. But what I discovered is the needle gauge that comes in this only accommodates, so these are the DMC 25, which is pretty, I think it's a pretty standard embroidery thread, and it wouldn't actually punch and hold the stitches with this thread. And what I couldn't figure out was going on is that each of these threads has 6 strands in it. Well, the gauge of needle that comes in this is a smaller gauge of a needle, and it would only accommodate 3 strands. So there's 2 ways that you can go about this. First way is you can buy this thread because it's very readily available, and you can buy the punch needle and just pull 3 of the strands apart, and then you only use 3 strands in here, and that way it punches correctly. The other thing that you can do is order the larger gauge of a needle, and that way you can just use the thread as is normal and thread it through there. So depending on how thick of stitches you want, and also you know, how many pieces and parts you want to try, if you're like me and you just want to try it out and see how it goes first. Maybe you don't want to buy all the bits. I'm definitely that way too. So you can definitely pick up the regular thread and then just separate it in half, and that way it's thin enough to use in this needle. So let's get started. The first project I'm going to show is this Thankful tote bag. This is my favorite. I love this one. It had a thicker font. So in that thicker font, after I used the black heat transfer, or I'm sorry, the black infusible ink, look at this. You can't, it doesn't leave anything besides the ink. It's so nice. And I just stitched down the middles of the letters. I love the texture that that gives. It so much fun. And then I just popped out those pumpkins with some glitter heat transfer vinyl. So in order to do this, I went ahead and I cut out my infusible ink. Now, you do this similar to when you're cutting out heat transfer vinyl. You want to make sure and mirror your image so that it cuts out upside down, and you cut out with the ink up. That way you iron it on and it's going the right way. So then I laid a heat pad down, and I'm going to iron this onto my tote bag. The difference with infusible ink is you actually put a piece of butcher paper, which is included in the ink, between the Easy Press and your infusible ink. And then once that timer is done, you can go ahead and remove that. I really love the color saturation here, and also it's so nice that the surface is completely smooth. Now, I took the paper remnants off of that transfer sheet for my infusible ink to use it as a protective piece. Make sure I don't mess up any of that ink when I am ironing those pumpkins on. And now to the stitching. I did go ahead and use my big hoop for this one, and I am going to show you the H because I ripped the T out after and decided to do these vertical stitches. I think it looks a lot better. And all you want to do is make sure that you're going slow and you don't lift the needle very far off of your project. And then when you get to a point when you want to change direction, you just have to turn your needle 180 degrees. That way it doesn't pull out the stitches from before it. Now, I'm sorry this part's off camera, but I actually pinched the needle underneath the project to grab onto that thread so that I could then pull the needle out without pulling my stitches out and go on to the next piece. Don't worry about all these pieces that are hanging out, because after we secure our stitches with glue, then those are going to get trimmed off. So this is what it's looking like so far. You can see you've got your stitches and your tails there. And next we are going to go ahead and carefully turn this inside out to secure all of those stitches on the back with glue. Now this is something that I did a little experimenting with. You want to be careful about the type of glue that you use, and the reason being because sometimes that glue can soak through the front and leave a little bit of a wet look. So what you're going to use, I used quick dry tacky glue. Always pre-test this on your fabric to make sure. And I'm going to trim off some of those extra long loops there on the back, just to get them out of the way before I glue all this down. So all I'm doing is applying glue to the backs of those loops there, and then I use the tip to rub it in a little bit. Like I said, you don't want to use a lot of excess glue because you don't want it soaking through to the front. And then you let that dry for about a day, and once it's completely dry, you can go back in and pull all of your tails taut and trim them off. If you wanted to be super meticulous, you could use a needle and thread them through to the back and glue them, but I am not that worried about it. So that's the finished project. I really love how the stitching just accents the thickness of the letters, and it is such a fun texture. The next project is this wine tote, and I really love the zigzag stitch. Now for this one I'm using our gather cut file, and I used just the line celebrate out of that. And I love that there is negative space in these letters, so what I did is a zigzag stitch between those spaces, and you can kind of see that. Now because this is a very thin bag, I couldn't get a loop in there, so I just held that ring in my hand and cupped it so that I made sure not to poke myself on the other side. Holding that ring helped create some tension between the fabric and my hand, so it allowed that stitching to be a lot easier, and it also kept me from poking myself because these needles are not dull, they are quite sharp. So all I did here was just start going back and forth, and I went pretty slow to start just to make sure that it would hold those stitches, and I just did a zigzag inside that negative space. And when you're going back and forth like this, the only thing you really need to pay attention to is changing the direction of your needle 180 degrees every single time, and that's what will help hold the stitches between each zigzag. Again, we're going to turn this inside out, and this time I used Aleene's Fabric Bond. This is the one that I wouldn't necessarily recommend on a thinner fabric because on the pillow I used the same glue and it did show through a little bit on the front. On the canvas, because the canvas of the wine bag is thicker, I didn't have any issues with it leaking through. So again, that's just why you want to make sure and test these on your fabrics beforehand. And really make sure that you're getting your glue down to the base of those loops so that they are secure. This project is our Hello Pumpkin pillow, and this is a more traditional method of just ironing the design down and then filling it in. On this last one, I decided to actually do most of the design in heat transfer vinyl, and then what I did is I just ironed the Infusible ink on these hearts here and filled them completely in. That way if there's any little spaces, there's an orange Infusible ink behind it, and it creates such a fun texture. So using the Infusible ink as a template is a really fun way to just stitch over it, and then you've got a little bit of color underneath just in case there's any little spots that you missed. Make sure to use an extra transfer sheet over your heat transfer vinyl if you're combining them like I did, just to make sure that you don't damage that at all. And with this one, I just had my hand underneath. This was the first project that I did do, and I found it was a lot easier to use those hoops. So don't be like me, just get a hoop the first time. Then just fill this in, skipping those white spaces, and I filled in the pumpkins and the hearts completely. Okay, so troubleshooting our stitches. Once we have our base picked out, now the bases that I use, I've got the Cricut tote, this is the small tote here, and then I have the wine bag, and then this last one was their pillowcase, and I used their bases because I wanted to, I knew it worked well with the Infusible ink because they're made to go together. So I really wanted nice, crisp color saturation, that kind of thing. Now, you can look at all three of these and notice that they are very, very different textures. There we go. So the weave in this and the actual strands in this are much thicker than this one. So if you're having issues take a look at that and kind of, with this one, I found that I wanted to definitely use the thicker thread, and on this one, I did end up using the thicker thread too. It gave me a little bit more resistance because I was punching it through a much finer, finer weave of fabric. And then when I did the pillow, I actually did all of this with the 3 strands that I had just mentioned, and that was easier to punch through because, again, the pillow has a bit tighter weave and a finer weave in the fabric. So hopefully that helps troubleshoot a couple of the things that you could run into. This is such a fun project to expand how you can use cut files, and the Infusible ink really is such a lovely addition to the product line. It's so easy to work with. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really had fun showing you this new project and this fun new way to use our cut files. Make sure to check them out on our website at ellieandmac.com and let us know if there are any new designs that you want to see. We're coming out with new collections all the time, and let us know what other projects you want to see if you like this kind of fun new use of our cut files. We will see you in the next video.